I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we do in all three GSAs in the entire Cuyata basin. That gets back to evapotranspiration. That's the way that the water that is consumed in the subbasin is measured. And you heard a little bit of discussion about meters and such, another way to measure water, and that's how much you consume. A little bit about the difference between applied and consumed, and why that is important. So I'll keep on real quick here. So who is Land IQ? One slide. We're a group of scientists that are made up of land-based scientists, agricultural scientists, myself being one of those. My family farms in Butte County. I grew up on our family farm and know all too well about irrigation water consumption. I did that for many summers. And then we also have part of our company is called what we call spatial scientists. They look at things from the sky. So those two technical disciplines form one another in the fact that that power in what we do is understanding both what's going on the ground and what's going on from the sky. I'm going to talk a little bit about evapotranspiration, and the main topic I'm going to discuss is how we do our work, and that is through heavy ground truthing. I'll touch on that in a minute. Why do we do ground truthing? It's defensible. It allows for a lot of different validation methodologies. It allows for a way to compare what is applied to the ground with what you consume. We measure the consumed part, the evapotranspiration. Those two numbers are not the same because what you apply is never 100% efficient. You've heard of irrigation efficiencies. You're 90% irrigation efficient. So if you apply 10 acre feet of water, your crops beneficially used or consumed 9. What happens to the other 1 foot? In many cases, that stays within the basin for use in the future, whether they recharge groundwater, downstream, or whatever. So again, we measure the consumed part, the evapotranspiration, not the applied part. We use how do we ground truth in this southern San Joaquin Valley? You work at a number of GSAs. We have approaching 100 climatic stations. Those stations are specifically designed. They're called eddy covariance surface renewal stations. They're specifically designed to measure actual evapotranspiration on the ground. And so we use that information to calibrate our remotely sensed approaches looking at imagery. So if you have a number of points across an image, and a number of times that you measure that very frequently, we can then calibrate what that's to look like on an image that covers the entire landscape. That's important because ground truthing is no different than your calibration of the spray rate. You care about things like pounds per square PSI, you care about ground speed, you care about nozzle size, and you calibrate your spray rate so that you don't put on too much chemical or you don't put on too little chemical for whatever you're using it for. The same thing is true with our ground truthing and calibration. We measure things like temperature, relative humidity, net radiation, wind speed, and other parameters to calculate actual ET to calibrate our models. It takes more time, it's harder, it can be a little bit more costly, but the objective and the reality is we're narrowing down that variability around what we're really trying to target and measure, which is the actual ET. We don't want to deliver numbers to you that says your demand is too high. If that's the case, then that restricts you on how much water you can pump. We don't want to deliver a number to you where we say your demand is too low. In that case, you're pumping too much and you won't become compliant with the signal. So our goal, and through heavy ground truthing, and that's a tenet of what we do, centers on reducing that variability through ground truthing. I talked about these reasons why we do this already. There's some pictures of these stations on the right-hand side. You'll see a few more pictures as we go along. The concept here is that these are serious monitoring stations. And again, we pepper the landscape with them for the purpose of representing what's actually going on the ground. These are the areas that we work in. Those red dots and yellow dots represent where the stations are. There's a number of them via subbasin. It's important to represent the entire landscape of crop distribution, elevation distribution, soil types, a number of variables that we consider when we site the station across the landscape. We work for approximately 40 GSAs and districts. The real value in that is some of your neighboring subbasins and GSAs also have stations. We don't necessarily care where the dividing line between a GSA or a subbasin is. We're looking at the two-dimensional spectrum of the landscape itself. So we use data from outside areas that represent or are similar. More major endpoints you have on the landscape, the more representative of the calibration data could be. So it's very intent on that. You might understand that because I'm pressing this so much. And our data are used. We are used in a variety of different ways, depending upon the GSA or the subbasin, to produce water pumping allocations, to represent billing structures. Some people actually bill off of our ET. Some are using it for planning. Some are the data are using groundwater modeling. The concept here is let's get a methodology that covers the entire landscape consistently and timely, so that everybody is treated the same, so that all the numbers are used across the landscape. So we don't have what I call falling off the cliff, where you use one method over here, one method in this GSA, and different results. You want to be consistent across the landscape. So at least in a relative sense, we're looking at things relative to one another. And we also collaborate with UC Davis, we have an advisor group, and USDARS, a couple retired extension agents. Some of you may know Blake Sandin and Alan Fulton. They are advisors every month for our results. Okay, ET, what is it? So this is these are just a good example of the results of evapotranspiration that we deliver every month on every field. So I'm going to go through our deliverables. First, we deliver 4 things to the GSAs, in some cases the entire subbasin, in this case we deliver field by field evapotranspiration on a monthly basis. We deliver field by field precipitation every month. We do that through precipitation rain gauges on almost all of the stations. We deliver crop type and we deliver permanent crop age. There's a correlation between how old the orchard is and how much water it consumes. So we use all those variables, measure as many variables as we can to get the best estimate of an narrow range of plus and minus on the ET. And this is just an example of monthly ET. And this is North Sewer District, but it's no different than anywhere else. Different fields have different ETs depending on how the water is managed, crop that's being grown, the age of the permanent crop, etc. That's 1, ET. 2, crop mapping. We're the contractor that does all of the crop mapping for the California Department of Water Resources. We map every single field in California. It's about 460,000 individual fields, 2 acres and greater. Why do we do this? This is for DWR, for planning purposes, so they can understand how the landscape is changing. And I've been in agriculture my entire life, and I will say that agriculture has never been as dynamic as it is today. There's a lot of pressures on agriculture, and regulatory pressures, labor pressures, market pressures, water pressures, etc. It's never been as dynamic as today. So to have these types of data to make hopefully more informed and objective decisions in water management moving forward is pretty important. So that's crop mapping. So we deliver crop mapping to all of the GSAs on a field by field basis. Permanent crop age, let's touch on that in a moment. The main point there is that there's a correlation, as I mentioned, between how old an orchard is and how much water it consumes. So we take that into account. Not every orchard consumes the same amount of water. It's the same idea as crop mapping. We establish that orchard is indeed an almond orchard or pistachio orchard, citrus grove. We look backwards in times when it wasn't one of those orchards. In fact, we have a digital fingerprint, I call it, for almonds, walnuts, pistachios, alfalfa, and fallow. all the other crops too. So when that digital fingerprint changes on an image, we look backwards in time to from almond orchard, for example, to a fallow fingerprint that we know when it was planted. That also offers an opportunity for planning when we might be able to plan on when orchards might be coming out, especially almonds when they're reaching their into their timeframe. That's a forecasted way to look at things. Okay, precipitation. I mentioned on all of these dots on the map, there are those stations that you saw some pictures of before, that there are rain gauges on almost all of those. The more dense you can measure points on the landscape, in this case precipitation, the more accurate you can estimate the precipitation to be on a field by field basis. This is a map on the right hand side for 2021. Somewhat of a normal precipitation here, so I use that to see if we can relate to some normal conditions up in 2022 or 2023. And this is just part of an area that we work in. Down on the bottom south west corner of this area, with all those dots that were on the previous map, we measure precipitation for that year to be, in some cases, as low as 4.5 inches. Not too far away, actually. Mr. Hagen's area, northeast part, precipitation there was measured to be 12.5 inches. So almost 3 times the difference in precipitation over that area. So when we're talking about getting down to the knapside realm on monitoring, previous speakers all talk mostly about water inflow. I'm talking about water outflow, the sky. We will measure water inflow precipitation. We're getting down to this need to get very accurate on these parameters that matter in the water elements. It's good to have these field by field precipitation values so that individual growers, individual field can make individual decisions, not using precipitation from a rain gauge in Fresno that doesn't represent necessarily what's actually happening on your field. That's our overall. Okay, so those are the 4 things that we present. Move a little bit faster here to try to stay on time. These are almond orchards on the right hand side. The color ramp on the left hand side gives you an idea of the difference of an orchard by orchard evapotranspiration. Not every orchard is always the same. I mentioned earlier why that's the case. We measure ET on every single orchard, so the representation of your water consumption is measured on every one of your blocks. This is a graph of thousands of almond orchard, walnut orchard, pistachio orchard, citrus groves from a water year. That is an average time frame ET from January through December, so accumulation of ET over time. Many people say, why walnut's such a bigger tree, such bigger leaves, how come it's not more than almonds? This is where our agronomic component of what we do kind of comes into play. Think about it for a second. Almonds leaf out about a month earlier, almonds leaf out about a month earlier than walnuts do. So they're ahead of the game already in consuming water. So that's just one small example of how we look at things agronomically, production-wise, to understand and interpret the validity of the results. Okay, you can plot that by age. Remember I said we have permanent crop age, so we plot those same data by age and see when almond, walnut, pistachio, or growth of citrus grow plateaus and when and at what age this happen at different times. This is a citrus curve in which it's the same cumulative curve, that same orange line on that graph is the same orange line there. But the reason I show this is look at the spread at the end. So there are actually, it's not a citrus grove that we looked at. There were 10 plus years and older of 7,000 citrus groves, where the EP was actually about 42 inches. There was actually a citrus grove 10 plus years and older, where the ET was more like 22 inches. Everybody's different. And what we're trying to do here is to relay to the growers what your consumption is. So then you can manage to what works for you. And that 42 inches may be completely valid purpose and reason why the grower does it. It's just that this is just to show that there is this range. And we plot that by age. This is for almonds, same idea. You see that big, by the time you get through 12 months, one almond orchard can be consuming much less or much more than the average. I think the same thing by age. We can plot it by month, the normal period, and I can do it by bar charts, it doesn't much matter. And then the last kind of series of slides that I have here is about validation. People ask us, how do you know that you're right? How do I know that the ET numbers that you're providing me on a monthly basis, with the water dashboard or whatever you're looking at, is I can trust them? So we go through a lot, I get that question a lot, and we go through a lot of ways to validate those results. And we'll touch on some of them briefly. Ground truthing, that's number one. Measure on the ground, calibrate to actual conditions with our models. We compare, that's the measure versus predict. See versus what we predict, how close to become. Applied versus consumed, I talked about that. Applied water that a field receives with irrigation and precipitation darn well better be greater than that consumed, because you can't consume more water than you actually have. So we look at those relationships, and that's a graph in the middle there that you see there. I'll talk about that just in a second. We've looked at literature, we have independent reviewers that look at our work mostly from the academic community. And we hang our hat actually on our agronomic knowledge and what we know, but, and oddly enough, I think people wonder when I say this, but one of the best validation efforts that we go through is that growers are actually, in some cases, writing checks based on their ET. And they're very wise about how much water they're using. And I kind of say this being a farm kid myself, I wouldn't be writing a check if it wasn't somewhat close. So not everywhere is doing that, but that is major versus predicted. We like things that fall on a one-to-one line. Applied versus consumed. The stacked blue bars are what? Those are 30 almond orchards. Each one of those blue bars represents 30 and individual almond orchard by age. The two stacked blue bars are the water that's received, irrigation and precipitation. Green line represents the consumption, the ET. Again, the concept here, we look at these things to make sure that we're not recommending more consumption. We're not reporting more consumption than what's actually received. That would not be physically possible. This is the same thing for pistachios. The green line just was turned into orange bars. Again, orange bar better be below blue bar. Same thing for citrus. Differences in age. We look at different age and efficiency of water uptake based on the distribution or the throw of the irrigation system and the root distribution. You see some differences there. We looked at extensive literature to make sure that we're in line there. One of the largest ETs ever reported in the literature in almonds that includes precipitation ET is 55 inches. In 2022, our greatest orchard was 54 inches. So we're right close to what's also being reported in the literature. As I mentioned, we use a number of folks to help us provide independent reviews. We talked about agronomic knowledge and grower acceptance. These are all ways that we try to validate our results, both quantitative and qualitative. And I'll just conclude with this. Accuracy matters in this case. Every drop matters. I never dreamt that growers would care so much about 5 inches of rainfall. They do. Where I'm from, we get 25 inches of rainfall, and sometimes it's a hindrance. Calibrate, we validate where it's defensible. That instills confidence in the results, and we're able to justify those results.